All right, so it looks like just about everybody has joined. There might be some late ones, but we are going to record this and we'll send out the recording afterwards. So we'll go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. This is Short Sales 501. My name is Krista Bertero. I'm the Director of Business Development here at Short Sale Cooperative. I am joined by my colleagues, our founder and CEO, Jeff Lamb. He's been working with short sales for, I don't know, Jeff, 30 years or so, as well as our Director of Operations, Joey Hasbury. Our company, quick background, we process short sales from start to finish for agents across the country who don't want to deal with them themselves. But we're excited to speak with you today to share some insight and some tips on processing these transactions on your own. And hopefully you're able to walk away with a bit more confidence should you decide to manage a short sale listing by yourself. We'll be covering several topics today. So we take a look at the overview. So starting out from how to acquire these leads in the beginning, all the way to successfully managing the closing. We'll leave time at the end for questions as well. If you do have any questions, feel free to add them in the chat. We'll try to answer them as soon as possible, but if we don't, we'll get to them at the end of the webinar. So without further ado, I will go ahead and hand it over to Jeff.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here and welcome to Short Sales 501. Let me see if I can control this a little better than I have in the past. Literally been practicing Zoom today just to make sure that I could go back and forth between these two things, the screen and then myself. I think that worked okay. Began doing short sales actually at 12 years old. That was back at 1990 or so, at least studying them anyway. I can't do very much when you're just 12 years old, but I was a really weird kid like that. I actually helped somebody accomplish their first short sale when I was 16 in 94, I believe. And, you know, since then, one level or another, this has just been sort of my career from the very beginning. I think that in the beginning, it was very similar for a lot of people out there. You know, you get into real estate because you want to make money and, you know, help provide for your family and do really well for yourself. But what I came to learn when working, after working for several years with short sales and struggling, you know, every step of the way, was that the focus really has to be on the people who you're helping and the way in which you're helping to make their lives better. And if, you know, once you start to really think about that and devote everything that you do toward their goals, then, you know, the rest of the puzzle pieces tend to fall into place a little bit more easily. We began as a local short sale agency working for, I believe it was Remax at the time, here based in Charlotte, North Carolina. Had 180 short sale listings of my own. By far the most of anybody in the Southeast. And I didn't know very much about the rest of the nation at the time. So I couldn't tell you who may have had more or less than that at around 2007, 2008. But obviously the market changes and it gets better in some places, it gets worse in others. And as it got better here in the Charlotte region, I decided that, you know, retail real estate really was not the direction that I wanted to go. Which is the reason that we began working as Short Sale Cooperative on behalf of other licensed agents in other states, was simply so that we could, you know, provide these services to people where they are, where they're needed most. And these days, most people, you know, we did the National Association of Realtors conference a little less than 6 months ago in San Diego. And most of the people that came up to us, most of the agents that came up to us were like, short sales, what are those? How long has it been since that was a real thing? But if you go and you do a conference similar to that in Chicago, everybody knows about them, right? So it just depends on what part of the country that you're in as to whether or not this is an issue for you right now. But I truly believe that every part of the country is going to be experiencing short sales at a level much greater than what we've seen over the last decade or so, at least in most places. And you guys probably see that too, or you wouldn't be taking the time and being here today. So we appreciate that, definitely. My goal today is really just to convey a level of information to you as short sale listing agents that will enable you to go out and do the best job for your clients as possible. Because again, that really is what this is all about. Can we do short sales better than anyone? Of course, I believe that, right? Would I love for you guys to work for us? Yeah. But at the end of the day, not every agent is going to make that choice. Not every agent, does it make sense for them to make that choice? And for those of you where doing it yourself is a viable option, something that you just want to do just to say you tried it once, or just to, you know, make sure that just because you don't trust us, right? One of those options. But I want to make sure that there are as many agents out there that have a level of competency necessary to at least get the job done without endangering the homeowner further. And I don't mean to say anything negative toward any real estate agent inherently. It's just that we do see these issues every single day. Dozens and dozens of agents bring us transactions or bring us, propose a scenario to us with a transaction that they're working on. And we see it more often than you could imagine. Just simple mistakes and simple errors and simple omissions that lead to foreclosure danger and just loss of the entire transaction and a loss of maybe a lot of money that the buyer invests or whatever, just things that hurt people that didn't have to happen had there been more information available. These courses that they provide to you, the SFR course or CDPE or any of those, nationally recognized sort of certifications aren't bad for new agents to take when first getting into the business. But I like to sort of, compare that to giving you enough knowledge to be a good buyer's agent in a short sale, to explain to the buyer what it is that's going on the seller's side so that they're comfortable enough to move forward with that transaction. Those certifications, I mean, I haven't taken one in probably 10 years now. When I did, it was really just to see what was being taught and what sort of information that they were giving out. And hopefully you'll learn one or two things, because I feel like with everything that you do in all education, you're going to hear a lot of things that you already know, and you're going to hear a few things that you don't, and a few things that might be shocking, and it's those few shocking things that I think make every class worth it, so today it may be a little more comprehensive, but if things haven't changed all that much, then likely what you're going to learn in those classes is just definitions, why people get into these situations, and a lot of basic stuff that we're just going to kind of skip today. As we mentioned in the stuff in the marketing materials, this is a more advanced class in the sense that, we're not going to talk about what a short sale is or anything. We're going to assume that everybody already knows that, and just kind of get into the nuts and bolts of the things that cause problems for listing agents in most short sale transactions. So you can see the bullet points that were on the screen. I'm going to go back to that now and just kind of get started, I guess. I'm not going to go down every single one of these. In fact, this is, had a chance to look at that earlier. We're going to go through slides on each of these. Let me make sure that, and Krista, Joy, feel free to jump in and stop me if I do something stupid with my screen over here and things aren't working correctly, but that should have gone to here. Okay, so the first thing that I want to talk about is lead generation, which I'm going to say is the least important part of this entire process. If you want to become a marketing expert, this is not the class for you to take. And I'm saying that as I have my master's in marketing and business. I went to school for that and got out of school still not completely knowing what it was that I needed to do to be successful in this industry. I do know that a lot of it is just, what I can say is that a lot of it is just the normal stuff you've heard over and over again, just doing it better, right? There are a lot of lead salesmen out there. One of the first mistakes that I made in this industry, and I made it to the tune of tens of thousands of dollars wasted, not just a small, I lost a few $100 here and there. But I lost a lot of money on people who promised me that they could provide leads of distressed sellers or just sellers in general. There's always some sort of an upfront catch, some sort of a thing. I use the word scam on the screen, but I'm going to be honest, that's a little, legally, that's not accurate. What they're doing isn't illegal, so I guess it's not technically a scam. But what they are doing is selling you magic potion that is no better than water. The types of leads that you get from these lead providers have so many different problems associated with them, whether that is because of how kind of shady or black, or kind of like how poorly they presented the proposition to the lead for them to send their information in the first place. Because if you're really specific with someone about what it is that they get, then they're going to know what you're talking about, and they're going to be less likely to submit their information. But a lot of these times, these lead providers are just putting generalizations out there just enough to get their contact info, and they're selling it to you for a ton of money. And then beyond that, a lot of times they're not just selling it to you, they're selling it to multiple other people. So I guess the thing that I just want to really be specific about is do it yourself. I think that, and if you're not certain of how to do that, then learn how. There's a lot of platforms out there online now, from Skillshare to, I think, is it Brilliant? I believe there's a lot of different things, that video platforms out there with educational courses on how to actually generate business in an array of different, industries. I'm losing words. that are very helpful for this. Don't let somebody else say they can just send you 100 leads for $100 and expect that to be the case. The very first thing in any marketing campaign in this segment of the industry is that you need to present a level of specialization to the public that tells them that this is what you're all about. Most sellers, I know us as real estate agents, we all know that, there's certainly different levels of specialties in this industry. People that are in commercial don't usually know as much about the details of residential and vice versa. And then it goes on, well beyond that. A lot of us don't know much about beachfront houses and all of the regulations and that come along with that. So if the homeowners, if they know a little bit about anything, they're going to be looking for someone who specifically understands how to do short sales. And so if you're going to begin any sort of a marketing campaign or advertising campaign directed towards them, you don't want to put your website, or even worse, we see this all the time with other agents, you don't want to put your company's website up there so they just land on the homepage of a regular residential real estate site. They're not going to see what they're looking for. The best idea is to have a website, obviously a website that's your own, but then beyond that, a website that's your own that only talks about short sales. Because if you're going to do marketing for short sale leads, you're going to do anything that it's going to be expensive. It's going to cost a lot of money, and websites are really cheap these days. There's all kinds of ways to get one for a few $100s or maybe even less than that, $40 a month. I'm not certain, honestly, at this point, how inexpensive it can be. I remember the first website that we ever paid someone to do was over $10,000. And now you can get a website that looks better than that one did for, like I said, 30 or $40 a month. So, but get it done. Make that be your first step so that they go to, shortsalesdallas.com. And all they see is a website dedicated to helping people in Dallas with short sales. There are a lot of people in Dallas with short sales today. No, that's probably a bad example. That city doesn't really have a lot of them. But regardless of wherever you intend to, make your footprint, make it about their location and, of course, about that specialty. Having information on your site is easy enough. You only need 4 or 5 pages. Some websites are only just one long page. But have that first before you start spending money on any sort of other marketing. The only kinds of marketing that we've ever really done that have, excuse me for a second, I'll go on and on forever. The only kind of marketing that we've done that has had any real success in obtaining seller leads and homeowner leads has been online and direct mail. And I know that sounds okay. Well, yeah, everybody knows how to do that. And again, I'm not here to tell you how to be the best online marketer. Pay-per-click is an entire college course of its own. So is search engine optimization. And so trying to, jump into any of those topics in any level of detail today would be difficult to do. But again, as you can imagine, if you're going to do either of those things, the first step is to have a website that you can direct those leads to so that they know that you're legit. Not everyone has the opportunity to work with direct mail. Depending upon your state, different states have different foreclosure notice laws in place. So the states out there that actually have notice of defaults or lis pendens, depending on what it's called, where there's a timeline in between the notice and the actual foreclosure that is sufficient, you can actually employ direct mail at a pretty successful rate. Now, there's different things about direct mail that everyone needs to be aware of, such as you can't just send one postcard. We're not blanketing the neighborhood with a just sold card and hoping that somebody lists with us because we sold another house in the neighborhood. That works for sure. But really what we're trying to do with a seller campaign for people who are in a distressed situation is to create a brand and a knowledge in them that you are the person that they can choose once they're ready to move forward with the short sale. And I'll get into that in a little bit more detail on the next slide. But the general idea is that almost no one who ends up selling a listing as a short sale really wanted to do that to begin with. And when you don't want to do something, you're going to procrastinate doing that for a long period of time sometimes, and really never longer than currently today, because of the forbearances on foreclosures that have been around for as long as they have been, and other protections in place from people for people who are in foreclosure danger. People have even more time to wait, even more time to procrastinate making these decisions. So the idea with direct mail is to be able to be there first as soon as the public knows, because as soon as they go on the notice of default list, they're going to get letters from every investor in your city and a lot of the real estate agents too. But again, that has to be a letter that they receive from you have to continue to do that over a regular period of time. And you have to be able to afford to do that, right? So do some budgets, figure out, okay, if I'm going to do, 250 people, if I'm going to tell 250 people that I'm the person that, and I will say a test market of people out there, the smallest one that I've ever worked with is 1,000 people. And it's not to say that I started in this industry with a ton of money. I didn't. I had nothing, but I do believe that in numbers, come results. So if you're gonna do a mail campaign, I think that a minimum really needs to be about 1,000 people. 5,000 to 7,000 is even better if there's enough people in your local market who are in need of what you're doing. But that's just from a quantity perspective. Again, there's no silver bullet to handling this. But you do need to know, based on percentages, what your return is expected to be and things of that nature. Sometimes that's something you have to prove on your own through trial and error. Other times you can get good statistics on the internet, so look that up. But you do need to make contact with them on a regular basis. So in any general marketing campaign with mail, you're going to want to front load that campaign, because the first thing that you send them gets thrown away, right? That's what you do. If you really just think about your mailbox and how you handle that, you're going to throw away all your junk mail every single time you receive it. So your mail has to be something that at a glance is recognizable. You don't need a lot of words. People don't read anything anyway. All they see are colors and shapes, and they're attracted when they are, and they're not attracted when they're not, right? So you want to present to them colors and shapes that are attractive and memorable, at least on some level, because they're still going to throw it away. But if you send them another piece in a few days, and then another piece a few days after that, eventually that color, that shape that you used, your logo, whatever it is that you're using, your professional photo, that those still work, that they're going to remember it. And if it's memorable enough, then they're going to start to read the headline. They're going to start to read the bullet points or whatever. They'll probably still throw it away, because what's happening is that they're learning who you are. But all they know at this point is that you're the person that they can contact if they want to do this. You already know that they're behind on payments. You already know, that's the reason you're sending them mail, right? And you already know that they are in need of a short sale, because as we'll get to, like, a short sale is almost always the best solution for a homeowner who's behind on payments. It's very rare that there's something else out there that's going to be better. Sometimes they need a short sale and perhaps some other counseling for some other matters in their life as well. But even versus bankruptcy, it's still usually the better option to go with, unless there's a ton of things going on, But in general, I'm getting ahead of myself. These guys don't believe that they're going to do a short sale when they're reading your mail. But what you want in the beginning is just to make sure that they know that if they did a short sale, it would be you they would choose. And then after you made that happen, really, and that's usually in the first 6 to 8 weeks of a campaign, then you can slow it down. You don't have to reach out to them every 10 days anymore, or every 12 days, or whatever you can manage to do. You can then just maybe reach out to them once a month or once every 6 weeks, just to remind them that, hey, I'm still here, it still works. But like I said, that only works in certain states where the public data, where the data of who is in distress is publicly available. When you go to the other states, which is about a third, I don't know the exact number, but I know there's a ton of them in the South, for example, Georgia, Tennessee, you get up into, I don't think Ohio has it. I'm not sure. Kristen knows this stuff better than me. I'm gonna stop naming states now. At the end of the day, it's about a third to even more of the states out there do not give sufficient public notice. And so what'll happen is, like Texas, for example, and again, I'm naming southern states, but we actually work in Chicago and Maine and California, probably more than any other states out there. It's just that, we work everywhere, so we know a lot about each individual place. In Texas, our most successful agents are the ones who actually do some of these things down here at the bottom. Because public notice comes out, I don't know the exact day, but it's about 3 weeks. So for example, if the notice comes out on the first Tuesday of the month, their plan is to foreclose on the last Thursday, something like that, right? But it really is less than a month of time from the point that you get that information that they're in danger and in need of what you have to do, to the point in time where they get foreclosed. And I am talking about historically accurate timeframes here versus what's going on today. Because what's going on still today is that they're not being foreclosed this quickly. But this is historic. This is the kind of thing they've always done up until COVID, and it is exactly what they're going to begin doing again very soon. Once these forbearances begin to start foreclosing as a result of non-payment. We've been seeing foreclosures. We didn't see a foreclosure for almost 2 years. And then all of a sudden, all the conventional loans start foreclosing or start to become in danger of foreclosure. We don't let things foreclose, but began to become in danger of foreclosure around November, December last year. And then just recently, we started to see some FHA transactions go in that direction as well. So that really does indicate the future of what's coming for an industry of, this is going back to normal again. So the point backing up to where I was at in Texas is that if you're an agent there, or many of the other states out there, check your local listings, then what you're going to have to do is something more immediate than mail can accomplish if you want to do that kind of marketing. But this is the kind of marketing that startup agents do. It's basically free. You have a list of people that need your help. You have the resources out there on the internet to find the contact information for these guys, at least for a good chunk of them. And then you can make phone calls to them and introduce yourself and the idea of a short sale as being a really good option. Some of our most successful agents in that state actually do this sort of thing on a regular basis. Others will actually go knocking on doors in neighborhoods where they feel safe enough to do so, maybe take a partner or a buddy with them so that it's not just one of you out there knocking on strangers' doors. And be ready for rejection, because that's what happens in this industry no matter what. There are a lot of people, more people are going to reject you than say yes, but the ones that say yes are oftentimes an enthusiastic yes. And it's the kind of like sort of response where you feel good about being the one who actually was able to introduce that to them as new information. And then I put down whatever's already working for you here at the end, because if you're a successful listing agent today, chances are you'll be a successful short sale listing agent tomorrow. We work with many of the top listing agents all across the nation because their teams are built around retail sales transactions and closing those guys down. And so just in the sense that, okay, if you're a top agent in your area and your face is on every single billboard up and down the interstate, people are going to reach out to you just because of that. They're going to want you to do short sales just because you're great at marketing local property. And a lot of times, top producing agents, they just don't want to hire an entire additional team to process the short sale transactions. So we end up seeing those guys a lot. So if you're that agent, if that's you and you're successful at getting listings now, don't change anything, because chances are you're going to continue to get short sales. You're going to get short sales accidentally, just as a result of the evolution of the market that's coming this and probably next year. So like I said, I actually spent more time on lead generation than I wanted to, but at the same time, I think it's important just to kind of understand that with lead generation in this industry, there is no magic bullet. There's nothing that's going to just be like life-changing or different. You just have to do it. You have to learn what works for you within the context of the message that you intend to send to your prospects. And then keep doing it and understand your numbers and your budgets and what you can afford to do long term. Don't just send one postcard. I think that's the most important thing. Don't just do one. So myths and misconceptions. One of the biggest things that we face after we send all of these, and the next two slides kind of go hand in hand. I'll try to come through this one a little more quickly than the next, but one of the biggest things that we face as agents, once these people who need our help have called the phone number or sent an email to the email address on the mailer that you sent them, are these things right here. The idea that a short sale is bad because of this, or a short sale can't be done because of this. So I want to kind of go through some of these, because these are hurdles. These are hurdles to their approval, their acceptance of signing a listing agreement. So the first one on here is that a seller must be behind on payments to process a short sale. This is one of those half truths. It's like, yeah, once upon a time, that probably was the case with more banks than it is now. And even currently today, that is the case with certain loan types out there. But in particular, it's only the case with certain conventional or smaller loan types. Like, most of the loans out there that you'll ever see as a listing agent in short sales are going to be loans that are with FHA or Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, or conventional investors that you probably don't know the names of, but they're actually almost as big as those other guys. And they all have the same rules and they all follow the same guidelines, because as an industry, it's easier to sort of equilateralize that and just make it all the same. And do all things the same way than it is for everyone to have their own same rules, than it is for everyone to have their own set of rules, rather. But there are those outliers, local credit unions, for example, strip mall banks, the types of banks that are more like a personal lender that happens to just it's more like a personal loan they're attaching to the property than it is a true second mortgage or a first mortgage. These guys do have all of their own different rules, and depending on who they are, some of them may require that a seller is behind on payments, but 99.99% of the time, and I'll try to stay away from percentages because they're never that accurate when people say them and they change every day, right? But the point I'm making with one like that is that it's almost never the case that a seller has to be behind on payments. They can be current. And in fact, I don't know how I feel about doing this today, but there have been times in the past that we've actually helped the seller short sell a house and buy another house and do it on the same day. Both closings happen on the same day, because when you short sell a home, it doesn't have a derogatory impact on your credit immediately. And if you've never gone behind on payments, then your credit score can still be good. And so, once upon a time that was possible and may even still be possible today. We haven't done it in a long time. I don't particularly love the idea of it just because I would never want to get a person into another situation where they might be in a short sell. But if they're downsizing and stuff, then why not? Why should they have to go rent if they did manage to keep them up? So it is possible to be current in most cases. Moving a little more quickly, once a foreclosure is filed, it's too late to sell. That is not true. The only hardline rule that we have out there right now is with FHA, where I believe you must be at least 37 days out from the foreclosure sale date. So what that basically means is that you're going to need to turn in an entire short sale package with all the required financial documents and an offer at least 37 days from the date of foreclosure. If you're day 32, or day 28, you might need to call us. But again, I'm not trying to sell our service. I'm just saying that you're going to need to know somebody at FHA in order to get that taken care of, because if it's under 37 days, it's usually impossible. I mean, even for us. But after that, and with almost everyone else, there can be a foreclosure that's on the books for 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now. It is still possible to process a short sale and get it closed. And get a foreclosure extension. There's 1,000 different ways to do it. It doesn't necessarily mean that just because it got filed, they're automatically disqualified. A lot of homeowners seem to think that. This short sale will always result in more taxes owed. It almost never does for a person who is qualified for a short sale. And I'm not a tax attorney, and I'm not a CPA, but we have a great video on our website from a person who is a tax attorney and a CPA, and he'll describe it way better than I ever could. But at the end of the day, people, the reason that short sales can result in more tax income, I can tell you this much as a layperson, is that you have an amount of forgiven debt in a short sale that's equal to the deficiency of the mortgage. So whether that's like $40,000 or $50,000, I saw one the other day for the first time in a while. Saw one with $500,000 in negative equity. I haven't seen that much in a while. But at the end of the day, when that's forgiven, then you get a 1099 from your mortgage lender, and that can be looked at as income by the IRS. But the operative word there is it can be. And most people who qualify for a short sale have no assets, very little, have no equity, no assets, and very little in the way of money in the bank or income. In those situations, there's a lot that a CPA can do. And again, I can't go into detail because I'm not one, but I'm not allowed to go into detail, as you all know, we're real estate agents here. But there's a lot that can be done, and the homeowner simply just needs to ask those questions of the right professional and get the correct answers, because they should never assume they're going to have to pay taxes. They're probably not. In terms of credit, foreclosure, short sale, deeds in lieu, lots of people believe these are the same thing, because you'll read in a lot of places online that the credit impact of a foreclosure, or short sale, or a deed in lieu is effectively the same. And initially it is, so what you're looking at is the credits, you're a person with a credit, again, credit profile, very complex sort of credit scores, very complex sort of thing. Calculations are different for different people. It depends on all sorts of variables as to how it's calculated out. But at the end of the day, the goal of most people doing a short sale is to get themselves as quickly as possible back into the financial position so that they can afford to buy another house in the future. It's like they messed it up this time and they want a chance next time to get it right. And they want next time to come as quickly as possible. for at least 10 or 12 different reasons that, again, I'm not going into on camera because I am not a credit specialist. That is much better to do a short sale. If you guys want to ask those questions later, or if you want to give us a call, we're always here to answer those kinds of questions and help you out with how to present that. The problem with being a real estate agent and talking about this kind of stuff with your clients is you're not professionally allowed to, but you're not really allowed not to either by the client. You've got to say enough to them so that you don't cross any lines professionally, that you're not giving legal or credit or tax advice. That's very important. But then you can't just be like blanket. You can't have these blanket statements like, go call a lawyer, go call a CPA. These guys are broke. They're not making house payments. They can't afford a lawyer or a CPA. That's scary. You just asked a question. You just opened a can of worms, and now all they think about is, I'm going to need to talk to a lawyer. Oh, short sale must be dangerous. I'm not going to do that. And again, this is about them, not about you getting the listing. It's more about them. And if you focus on helping them, one of the focuses has to be on getting them enough information to make them feel calm and confident about taking an action that is beneficial to them in the future. Short sale will help them. We've just got to make sure that we're not scaring them away from it by, giving them no information or worse, a scary red flag that they need to go call somebody. Obviously, you're going to tell them to talk to an attorney. Obviously, you're going to tell them to talk to an accountant. It's just not the very first thing you say. That's all. And so there's ways to handle that and ways not to. So don't go out there and just try to read up on that. Okay, that's all I want to say. Gotta cover our butts all the time here, right? So the bank is a party to the transaction and will make repairs and do other things like they're the seller. I'd be surprised how many buyer's agents ask almost every single day whether or not the bank is going to sign the contract. A short sale is legitimately a real estate transaction between a buyer and a seller, just like any other. The bank has zero authority to make any decisions about the agreements between the buyer and the sellers, at least not directly anyway. Ancillarily, yeah, of course, because if they don't approve the offer, if they don't approve taking the loss that the current offer requires them to take, then nobody closes. So in a roundabout way, they do have some authority, some indirect authority, but not really legally. They don't get to sign the contract. They don't get to approve, anything other than the amount of loss that they're taking. So, a lot of times we don't just work with agents. We work with closing firms, and we work with lenders as well. And they'll ask these kinds of questions too. I need an affidavit signed by the bank. Well, Bank of America is not going to sign that. They're only going to sign the documents that they feel that they deem necessary for that transaction. So yeah, but we'll move on from that one. And then the last one, I think, is the one that I'm being told that is anybody else having any sound issues? Can you guys hear me okay? Noticed a few people were having some. I'm going to continue. Let me know if that continues, guys. Thank you. Sorry.
And just a quick reminder too, we are recording this and we'll send it out to everybody afterwards in case you are having trouble now. I'm sorry that you're having trouble, Lisa. I just real quick, sometimes when I change my sound input to something else and change it back to what I want to hear from, that'll adjust it. So you could try that.
Little button beside mute.
But hopefully get that
All
sorted out.
And the last one, I think, is one of the more important ones on this list because it messes everybody up. As agents that aren't always, on top of the individual regulations of every single lender out there, right? The first thing that you typically do in those situations is you call that lender and you say, hey, what do you need for me to process your short sale? What does your short sale packet look like? How much do I need to provide? And they're going to give you a list of information, and it's going to sound quite competent because they were hired because they sound competent on the telephone. They have good communication skills verbally, perhaps even written communication skills when you're communicating via email. But at the end of the day, you just have to kind of understand like the fact that, most of the time they're really just reading from a screen there, and that screen isn't always accurate. There's almost always a servicer, and we just kind of we just group everybody else that is not the servicer into the investor category. It's not always exactly that, but it's really the servicer and then the person who owns the money, right? Who owns the money might be a manager of the same entity, but the case is usually that the servicer that you speak to doesn't always know all of the rules of the person who owns the money. So if you're calling Bank of America and it's a Fannie Mae loan, this is all the rules of this loan are being dictated by Fannie Mae, and Bank of America is just trying to interpret that in the best way that they can. And with short sales today, we're working direct. Everybody pretty much is working through HomePath and directly with Fannie Mae. So I guess a better example would really be through an FHA loan, because there's so much confusion out there, and FHA tends to allow smaller servicers to do their servicing than we typically see with the other big guys. So we can be with ABC Mortgage out of somewhere random, and they have no clue how to process a FHA transaction. But you don't know that because the person you're talking to sounds like they know what's up. So what I would just suggest is that the best way around that as an individual agent is to question everything that you hear from anybody at the bank, especially if it sounds a little counterintuitive. And then also perhaps call back again and get a second opinion. Have somebody else tell you what it is that you need. And if you don't trust that the person who's talking to you on the phone knows what's up, that maybe they just started yesterday or something like that, then ask for a supervisor and make sure to get clarity on it, because what you'll end up doing is following their instructions to the letter, and then finding out that those instructions were inaccurate, incomplete, or completely wrong. They told you the instructions for a conventional loan when it was VA. And the rules for those two things are quite different. So don't trust the bank associates any more than you have to, basically. So next screen, conversion techniques. I started off with that, like I said, because there are a lot of misconceptions out there, right? And those things come up when you're speaking to homeowners. I think, when we talk about lead conversions, it gets very cold, right? It sounds like it sounds like what you're trying to do is just turn a person into a customer, get their money, and move on, right? And yeah, this is a business, and we all have expenses and overhead, and we want to do something to help people, but at the same time, we're here. This is our job. We need to get paid for the work that we do. We all have we all deserve to get paid for what we do, just like every other American. But you've got to really come at this from a different angle. It is about volume of numbers. It is about having the right number of people to talk to. It is about the number of touches and all those things that you have found success with in sales before. It's about all of that. But when you're having the conversation with them, it's not about impressing them about how good you are. Agents, I tend to be this way when talking to retail clients. It's like, I'm the best at this, I'm the best at that, we do this for you. Not everybody else does that. We're always going to answer the phone. We communicate within a few minutes. All these things are important, but to them, it's about the relationship that they have with you and trust more than anything else. And it's like that in every part of real estate, right? For the people that really understand, the intricacies of those interpersonal relationships with their clients, they get, it's like that everywhere. But it's never more important than with somebody who is behind on payments, whose entire family is in danger of having to relocate to somewhere unknown and changing schools for kids and stuff. Short sale is not going to really help to make those situations better, but they will feel more confident about entering into that situation voluntarily when they trust the person that they're working with, and trust comes after like, so they've got to like you. And I think that I can't tell someone how to like you, but what I can say is that, if you've got to approach the situation like they are a brother or a sister, and you need to speak to them like they are an intelligent fifth grader. And I use that phrase a lot because it's important. We as agents get into a tunnel of knowledge about this industry that can segregate us from the rest of the population of normal people. It really comes down to the language that we use, the verbiage that we have in our contracts, and a number of other things that just make people kind of, I don't know, that sounds kind of complicated to me. What I usually recommend is just, listen, first of all, always record yourself. If you can in your state, if you can record yourself in your state, if you're a one-party consent state where you don't have to tell everybody else that you're recording, that's great, because then you can definitely hear back. And I'm not saying you're going to go use this for any official purpose. You want to be able to hear back what you're saying and then think about their reactions and really analyze that to some degree. What I've experienced just little things like not saying the word mortgage, but just saying loan or home loan or something along those lines. Small things can mean a lot to people when they are not as sophisticated in these areas of specialty as we are as agents. sellers' motivations they vary, and there's really specifically two different kinds of sellers. You got proactive sellers and then the more reactive sellers. Your proactive sellers are people who understand that they are about to go into arrears on their mortgage. They're about to miss a payment, and they want to do something about it, whether that's because of just a sort of loyalty or a duty to do the right thing, or because they no longer need the property. That kind of falls into both of these categories. And then just an abundance of fear, that just a never-ending fear that they're going to be foreclosed immediately, which isn't, as we all know, it isn't necessarily true. That the foreclosure comes immediately, and in some states and cases it can come pretty quickly after the first missed payment, but not usually. So those are the guys that sign up right away. Those have been pretty much the only people listing short sales for the last 2 years. And it only represents a small minority of the people who do short sales, of the sellers who choose to list a short sale and sell a property now. The overwhelming majority of people who actually list short sales are the ones that got a foreclosure notice or a threat of foreclosure in the mail. It's the reactive sellers that basically need a demand or something real to show up on their front door before they're going to make the choice to change their lifestyle, move their family somewhere else that's less expensive, and get back on track with their lives. The truth is, the faster that anyone not making mortgage payments can get into a place of financial security, the more long-term benefits they're going to have from that. The longer they go without making these payments, the more detriment there is. And it works like that in virtually every case. But what we have to really understand is that reactive sellers will think proactively in the beginning when they first miss that first payment, because they've never missed a payment before. And I cannot count how many people told me in 2008 and 2007, how many conversations began with, I've never missed a payment in my life. I can't believe I'm in this situation. There's a lot of shame and guilt that came with it back then. I think there's a lot less of that now because people understand that this is out of their control in many cases. And even back then, it was honestly out of their control in a lot of cases too. But at the end of the day, though, that is a lot of people in the very beginning. Those are the people that's at the time that they're going to submit their lead to you. It's going to be about 10:30 at night. They're feeling some anxiety because they just missed their first mortgage payment, and that fear comes up, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, what's going to happen? I need to make some decisions." And they'll search the internet and they'll find you online, or maybe they'll remember that postcard that you sent last week right after their first missed payment came in. And then they'll make that call or send you an email at 10 o'clock at night. Most of our leads come in most of the homeowner leads that we receive come in between like 8 p.m. and midnight. And so these are the guys that are just, having that right before bed sort of anxiety. By the next morning, they've woken up, their brains reset a little bit, situation and problems still exist in their life, and they still need to do something about it, but they're not as apt to care as much. So the only reason they're really answering your call the next day is because of professional courtesy. I asked you for help last night, so I'm going to answer your call, but at the same time, I'm not really all about it anymore because I'm not as nervous. As you get down the pipeline, I've called it the fear pipeline because it really is. It's just like any other sales pipeline. It's like a roller coaster. There's going to be peaks and valleys where they feel more confident or less. And those peaks and valleys are directly affected by the way in which the bank is coming across to them. So for the last 2 years, the bank has been coming across to people as though we're going to help. All we want to do is help. Help. But they're not helping. They haven't done anything to help, not anything long-term, nothing real. What they've actually done is just put a moratorium on payments, making it possible for people to not make payments. And in most cases, not receive any credit detriment as a result of that. But starting in January last month, I guess 2 months ago, technically now, gosh, they began to send invoices to these same people saying that we need $10, $12, $18, $25,000 from you by the end of February or the end of March or whatever deadline that they gave them. And I mean, gosh, guys, nobody has that. No normal American has more than $10,000 at their disposal at any one point in time. So where they've been in this situation where they thought they were getting help from the bank, really all they got was just, let's kick this problem down the road until it becomes where people aren't going to trash the bank for asking for money, basically. And that's where we're at now. So these guys have $10,000, $12,000, $20,000 bills on their front door steps that they can't do anything with. But even with that, so that's why we're getting a lot of calls, but even with that, there's been no collections actions taken from the majority of lenders out there against that yet. So they're still behind on payments. The bank is now saying you owe this. So that's really what happens. So when the bank says you owe this, fear went back up, right? And oh my gosh, I'm going to have to pay this much money. Let me call a short sale agent and get answers on how I can correct this. But then another 2 weeks goes by and they haven't gotten a delinquent notice about that $20,000 they owe. They haven't gotten a foreclosure notice. Nothing's happened really. And so they're feeling more confident about it. This is what happens with homeowners, and it's just normal. It's how we all are, really, on some level with certain things. What really makes them move forward is when they think that when they get a foreclosure notice or they get something stating foreclosure is being filed from an attorney, this is when they start to take action, and that's coming in the very near future. I wish I had an actual date for it so that I could be prepared even within our own organization, but we're all still just kind of at the whim of, or at the mercy of the whims of the people at the financial institutions. But at the end of the day, once these foreclosure notices start going out, that's when sellers start to make the decision to list. And that's why when I was talking about direct mail and follow-up campaigns, you have to be there from the beginning when they make that first phone call, develop the relationship along the line so that 6 months down the line, and now for some of these people, 2 years, they know that it's you, and you're the one that they call that next morning and say, hey, I want to do something about this and make it happen. Communication methods, everybody loves text messaging these days. I'm not a really big fan of it. It could be because I'm an old guy and I prefer old-fashioned communication. But I know that it's not just that, right? I'm actually also a software developer, so I'm pretty good with the technology and things. My problem with text messages is that it's too easy to blow someone off. It's too easy to send like a one-liner that says, I'm not interested anymore. Well, yeah, they may not be interested anymore, but that really just means is they're not interested that day, in that moment that you reached out to them. But a text message feels more final in that way. So it's almost like they're somewhat offended if you ever reach out to them again because they sent you a text and said they weren't. I don't know. And I'm not saying don't use it. Obviously, it's one of the things that it can be very effective with certain people who never answer their phone, no matter what. Certain people who don't look at their emails more than once a month. So I would just say that use it in lieu of voice communications. Only when you feel it's necessary, because again, you want them to like you, you want them to trust you, and you can't do that without a real human being relationship. And the closest you're going to be able to get to that with any technological means is going to be a telephone still today. And then, I mean, if you can do Zoom and all of that with distressed homeowner, go for it. We haven't integrated that into our platform just yet due to the technological limitations of most people that are in distress. But that's another option as well. It really is just about being that counselor for them and connecting with them the best way that you can. And it's just tough to do that with text messages and emails alone. So I'm going to move on from there. Get to my favorite, technology. I won't go into too much detail on this. I just need to cover it and point it out, because if you can't stay organized, then you can't be a short sale or really a regular real estate agent these days. Everybody, it seems to, I think, get free technology from most real estate firms out there. So if you work for one of the big guys or even one of the smaller ones, they're probably offering you something that you can use to organize your transactions in a way that's sufficient to not have things fall through the cracks. I would just suggest that when it comes to short sales, there's a lot more going on. And it requires something a little bit more custom, something that you can develop for yourself. There are a number of platforms out there that allow for this, but honestly, guys, I am not the expert in that any longer because I don't use third-party platforms any longer. We've been developing our own custom software for the last 14 years or so. We do build it on the Salesforce platform, but we don't use the Salesforce out of the box software that they have. We just use their programming language. And that's an option if you know how to do that. But for the most of the rest of the world out there, you're going to need something that is more like, I don't even know if Zoho's still a thing, but it used to be like the cheap Salesforce where you could program it without having to really have a lot of coding knowledge. That's what I would look for. I would look for something that allows you to add your own data fields, something that allows you to create background processes, because what's the use if you have a CRM that doesn't automatically take actions because you clicked a button or because you did something, then it's missing a huge component. You need some automation there to sort of streamline how you handle certain processes, updating, for example, and things of that nature. Again, I can't give you a lot of feedback on which CRMs to use. What I'm just going to give you the best advice, maybe if you want to be a short sale agent on your own, is you've got to use something and you've got to know a lot about it. You need to be sort of almost an expert in that field, or at least be the guy who I highlight next time for the next 501 who comes up here and says, okay, well, here are the 5 best CRMs that a real estate agent can use. If any of you have any feedback on what's going on in today's market with regard to that, shoot us an email. I'd love to hear your comments and your suggestions as it applies to that topic. I will say that the 2 types of follow-up that are the most important, and we have to segment this out, right? Because there are certain things, like when you're listing a property, you know that you need to put it in the MLS, you know that you've got to take pictures, you got to put up a lot box. If you still use real estate signs, then that's cool. You got to put a sign up. Those are all tasks that can be regimented for every transaction. The thing with a short sale is that it's not the same, and it's very rarely the same from one transaction to the next. You sort of approach these from within a framework of knowledge that you have to then apply using common sense and intellect in order to figure it out. This is a problem-solving industry. And in that sense, one of the things that we developed early on was just a knowledge-based follow-up process where, yeah, we'll have some tasks that come out for typical things in a listing like photos and MLS, but then we'll just set a date on which we need to make sure that every single thing is done. So that's usually when we have an offer on a property. That's usually every 2 to 5 days, more often closer to 2 than 5. And on that day, so we'll set a date and we'll say, hey, that we have to follow up again on this file tomorrow because we know that by tomorrow this thing should happen at the bank. You don't necessarily set a task for what you have to do tomorrow. We just say we have to touch this again tomorrow. And then one of our associates, if you're doing this on your own, you would then look at that file again tomorrow and just reassess it and be like, okay, what do I have to do? What is every single thing I can do today in order to pass the ball to the other court, basically, and have it be, the current task that we're waiting on to be accomplished is somebody else is doing that. That is one of the better ways to follow up on short sale transactions, because again, you just can't necessarily implement a solid state task list that applies to every transaction, or otherwise you or your associates are going to be clicking and deleting or creating new tasks or getting rid of ones that weren't applicable. It can kind of bog down your system. Regular updating needs to be a part of a CRM, and I prefer those where you post an update to the transaction, and that update is then shared with everybody in the transaction that needs to see that information. I don't know necessarily whether or not that's a thing out there that's automated these days. It wasn't. It was one of the main reasons we went over to the custom side of CRM development, but I would imagine that it probably is, because it's somewhat basic 14, 15 years later. The most important element of that is not necessarily the ease of it. Even if it's hard, you have to send out a separate email to everybody in from Gmail, then do that. Communication is the most important thing in a short sale transaction, because it not only communicates to them what's going on and it's professional and nice and all, it continues to reassure the parties in the transaction that success is imminent. And if there's a problem that's causing delays, here's the reason. And it's not just here's the reason, but like it's communicating that information, and you need, this is a little off from relationship management exactly, but you've got to be able to communicate it in a way that helps them to understand this is ordinary and normal. I know it doesn't feel that way. I know that you're stressed out because you want to buy this house, or you're stressed out because you want to sell your house and move on with this situation. But it is normal. This happens, and sometimes it happens a lot. And the more that you communicate that information to someone, the more they are going to believe you. If you only update them once a week, or worse yet, every 10 days, every month, then and then they get something that's less than ideal, it's not going to come across nearly in the same way. And I put developing your brand amongst other agents, because real estate agents in your market are going to get, if you have more than one short sale, real estate agents in your market are going to get to know you based on whether or not they like to work with you, whether or not you answer the phone, whether or not you return their emails. And they're going to make offers on your properties based upon that information as well. I mean, these days in many of the markets that we work in, it doesn't matter. They can hate you all they want. Their client's going to make an offer because you might have the only listing in the MLS, or one of the only ones worth buying. In markets past and markets future, for sure, we'll come back to something more level, and the buyer's agents will avoid you if you're not calling them back and not providing these updates. So it's important. I'm going to move on. This is probably the most important slide in the entire, oh, I'm sorry. No, that's the next one. Although this is very important as well, because it leads into whether or not your short sale gets approved or not. Pricing a short sale is not like a foreclosure. As huge misconception. I probably could have put that on that first slide about the myths of short sales in general. You need to price a short sale like a retail transaction. And almost to the point where other agents are going to laugh at you for asking so much money for this house that's burned down. And the reason is because you are making a case not to the buyers that this house is worth that. You're making a case through your pricing strategy to the bank that you tried to get them the most money you possibly could. Most of the stuff on this page is relevant only to transactions where you do not have an imminent danger of foreclosure, which is most transactions these days. Obviously, if there is a foreclosure in 6 weeks, then you're gonna approach the situation from a marketing perspective very differently. But assuming that you don't have an imminent foreclosure coming very soon, this is usually the best way to go. 100% at the very minimum of the as-is value. If you do a CMA or a BPO and you are and you're coming up with a number of $150,000 for after repair value, or just at any other property out there that's ready to move in, and then you estimate $20,000 in repairs, you should list it at 130. Don't go in and try to give the investor extra money, just for having to do the repairs or for the inconvenience of having to do them. Get to that point later. And I'm not suggesting that you're going to sell it immediately at the highest price possible using these strategies. What I'm solely explaining is that you have to be able to show the bank that you tried to get the highest and best price possible. If you believe that the property has, I mentioned $30,000 in repairs, that's kind of a lot on 100, and I'll say 50, I don't know. Really, if you believe that the property has more than about 5 to 10% of its value in repairs, then you're definitely going to want to more than just believe that. You're going to want to know. You'll need to get a contractor to come out and do an estimate. The banks really don't take into consideration opinion of a real estate agent when it comes to the dollar amount of repairs that need to be done. And also, the bank is going to do their own appraisal on the property, and that appraiser themselves is not necessarily going to be 100% skilled or knowledgeable about today's costs of doing these repairs. Maybe they knew something about doing repairs 5 years ago because they used to be a contractor back then before they were an appraiser. That's the worst possible situation, because virtually everything costs, some things 100% more today than they did 5 years ago when it comes to residential construction. And so we need to know what today's prices, today's numbers are in terms of dollars and cents for this specific house. And then you can use that information not only to adequately start your pricing strategy or adequately design your pricing strategy and start your listing, you can use it with the bank as well to prove that the property really is what you say it's worth, and not what their appraiser thinks that it's worth, because they didn't really look into the cost of the repairs. Obviously, if there's no showings or offers, you can reduce the price, but we recommend that you do it in very small increments. Again, showing the bank that you're doing the best that you can. I've seen a lot of issues out there with, say, you have a $300,000 house, doesn't get an offer for 30 days or 45 days. Agents will drop at $50,000 overnight, and of course you get a bunch of offers. The bank's not as clueless to that situation as I think some people believe they are. They will get the marketing history of the property. They will see that the $50,000 price drop resulted in 5 different offers, and they will think, well, what if they only dropped at 10? So it has to be in smaller increments and over the course of time, and not necessarily all at once. And then if a bank appraisal comes in too high, the only thing that you can do, you can initiate a value dispute with the bank. It can be very complicated to do those. Our value dispute packages are like 70 pages long sometimes, because that is the kind of information that they expect to see to take you seriously. But you can also, make sure that the bank understands I've got contractors' estimates for repairs here. They have told me this is going to cost $50,000 to fix. You can see based on the appraiser's own comps, these houses are in, like C2 condition and not C6 like this house is. Like they're in a lot better shape than the house is. And yet you're only giving me credit for like what, $10,000 when the contractor says it's X more. You can do that and possibly get the bank to agree to the value that you believe the house to be. But when they say no, and it's absolute has to be this amount, whatever that amount is, you got to go back to start. You got to go back to the starting board. You have to basically, terminate with the buyer that you have right then. And a lot of listing agents make this mistake. They get really, truly too committed to the buyer that they have, more so than the interest of closing the transaction. And so they'll fight to the tooth and nail and go for a year fighting the bank with one buyer and one offer. And they were never going to make that happen without at least showing the bank something more in terms of marketing effort. And that usually means terminating with that buyer, going back to the market at their appraised value or whatever their last counter offer was, and kind of starting the process over again. Spending about 30 days out there, making sure that you don't accept any offers underneath that amount. And you don't tell all these buyers to, get lost, right? You explain what you're doing to the current buyer that you're terminating with them. So sorry, but the bank is going to require that we do this. And then you tell any subsequent buyers that come in they're saying like, oh, that's way too high, I could do another amount. Oh, well, thank you so much. I'll take your name and information. And when the bank is ready to entertain an offer that low, we'll come back. But you really just can't go back to the market and then take another offer that's lower than what they just told you a week ago that they wanted and hope to have different results, because it doesn't work that way. And then, oh gosh, there was something I thought of that I should have gone back at. Oh yeah, keep in mind that when you start listing the property, you really should never take an offer from any buyer at any price for at least 2 weeks. For certain kinds of short sales, that is an absolute requirement. FHA, I believe, or Fannie, Joey would know this. That's for certain short sales, that's an absolute requirement where they won't entertain anything until you've been on the market for at least 14 days. But I would say for every short sale, you have a lot more in your arsenal of evidence to prove to the bank if you wait at least 2 weeks and then show them that in these 2 weeks we received offer A, B, C, and D. This one is clearly higher, so here you go. One of the things, and even if you don't get around to showing them all of that, and even if your bank doesn't care to see all that, some don't, then the one reality that they are going to notice the most is that you have 1 day on market. 1 day. And that is just not enough marketing time to equal a legitimate offer pretty much in many, many, many different short sale circumstances. I even wonder what retail's doing these days where they get 50 offers in 1 day. I mean, if you're going to get 50 offers in 1 day, why don't you price it 50,000 higher? I don't know. Maybe one of you guys can tell me, because that doesn't make a lot of sense to me either. If I feel like I only want 2 offers the first day. If I got more than 2, then I'm thinking maybe I should have gone higher and waited. But in any event, guys, you wrap in your own strategies, the ones that work for you, that you've proven to work for you, that are proven to work in your market, along with some of this stuff. Just understand that the bank doesn't care about local market strategies. They only care about what they perceive to be effort, and effort means doing it their way for at least a certain amount of time and proving to them that they were wrong, which they frequently are. With that said, moving on to the next stage, or the next thing, this is the most important slide because contract considerations are the thing that hold a transaction together, that keep it there all the way until close, and that actually enable you to close the transaction. We only work for sellers, haven't worked for buyers in over 10 years. And our exclusive goal is to work on behalf of the listing agent who works for the sellers, right? And so a lot of what I say comes from that frame of reference. If you are an agent who has an investor buyer that, kind of your job is to help them purchase transactions, and short sales are some of the ones that they purchase, then some of these policies are going to rub you a little bit the wrong way. And it's not to say that that it's necessarily every single one of these things has to be followed 100% of the time, but it is the highest and best way to handle transactions. So good faith fees or earnest money, we use something a little different than earnest money because we like to make sure that the buyer actually follows the promises made in the contract. And if they don't, then they don't get their money back. With earnest money, that's not always the case in every state. And I know some of you are thinking, really? Yeah, certain states out there, it works funny, and so we use a different kind of setup. But at the end of the day, most of you guys are going to be working with earnest money, right? So we'll focus on that. We want to make sure that the buyer has something to risk, something to lose, or this isn't a real contract. And when you go under contract with a seller, when you have a buyer go under contract with a seller, you are committing your seller to 90 days, usually 75 to 90 days at a minimum. Actually, the average short sale approval, I'm thinking about our timelines, the average short sale approval usually is something between 90 days and 120 days right now. And that's if they get approved. Only 43% of those get approved. So you're really committing your seller to waiting another 4 months. They're going to get closer to foreclosure about 4 months during that period of time with only a 43% chance of success. And you allow the buyer to engage the seller in a contract where the buyer can terminate at any time, then that risk for the seller goes exponentially higher. At no point in time should any contract ever not have some sort of a binder where the buyer has something to lose as a result of breaking their promises. Because in no other transaction will a buyer more often break their promises than in a short sale transaction. Buyers, they purchase on impulse, even if they're investors and they've got their numbers, it's still more interesting to them in the beginning than it is 2 months later. And that's just the reality we have to face in this industry, is that no matter how good you are, you're never going to be able to have average numbers under 6 weeks. And even for the best of us, our average numbers are usually a little farther north than that. But at the end of the day, though, for a buyer, 6 weeks still is like 12 or 18, anytime that you're having to wait on something like that, it feels like triple the amount of actual time. So the contract has to take these things into consideration. One of the things that goes back to pricing strategy, if you accept any purchase price that's less than 90% of the list price that you currently have the property marketed for, you should really consider reducing the price first, rather than taking an offer at 80% of the list price or at 50% of the list price. Banks hate to see that. When they see a $200,000 house being with an offer that you accept an offer of $155,000 in 2 days, right? That just does not look like you were very competitively priced, or you were not negotiating, or both. So try to get the offers at least above 90%, 93 to 95, or 100% is better than that. And if you can't get offers at that amount, then as I've described in the last frame, just gradually reduce the list price until the offers you can get do represent at least 90% of your list price, and take those. And usually what that ends up being is that you list at $300,000, you can't get an offer of at least 270, so you reduce it down to 295. Still can't get anything higher than, say, 260. Reduce it down to maybe 290, and then 270 starts to look a little bit more realistic to the bank. The difference between those two is more realistic, and also the time on market has gone higher too. Once your time on, in most markets, once time on market is above 2 to 3 weeks, it starts to seem old these days, right? And over 30 days is ancient. So it's really doesn't take that long, but you do need to have some patience and spend a little more time. The buyer's ability to terminate is governed way differently from one state to the next. We change all that and make everything work the same way with our transactions, because it would drive me crazy trying to keep up with the small things of like repair contingencies and attorney review periods and financing contingencies. Guys, I'm telling you, a financing contingency is the best way to lose a short sale transaction. And short of having your own special addendum the way that we have it, I'm not exactly certain what's possible in each and every state out there, but I would advise you to seriously consider any contingency in your contract that allows the buyer to terminate, and limit that to the greatest degree that you possibly can. One of our philosophies when it comes to accepting short sale offers from buyers is that you need to be qualified or have cash. And obviously we all think that, right? But we always give the buyer such a pass for then, whoops, I'm not qualified. Well, no, that's not whoops. You bought a boat. That's not whoops. You didn't get completely pre-qualified before you approached this transaction and made an offer to purchase it. Or you knew the whole time, and so did your lender, that you were on the borderline, and so much on the borderline that if we rerun your credit again in 3 months, who knows if you're actually going to be approved or not. Now, the buyers who meet that description, they know they meet that description. And the buyers who are totally qualified, 100%, to go out and buy 3 houses, twice as much as this one, they know they meet that description too. It's those buyers you want to commit your seller's time to. You want to commit your seller's time to people who are absolutely able to buy it. And so for that reason, we kill the financing contingency. You need to know that you can get financed, or you need to buy a retail transaction where there's not so much on the line. And on top of that, guys, the appraisal contingencies, the repair contingencies in contracts need to make sure that these inspections that buyers are doing are getting done within the first 10 days of the execution of the offer. There's so many important reasons for that. But again, the last thing that you want is to get a short sale approval from the bank after 90 or 120 days, and then come to find out that there is a repair issue with the property that was uncovered by the home inspector that we could have learned about in the very beginning. And so now the buyer wants to probably, reasonably wants to reduce the price of the property because of this issue that they've found, but it's too late. You can certainly go back to the short sale lender and you can submit that repair report or that home inspection report with repair bids. But what you're going to have to do is actually start over from the very beginning, almost as though it was a brand new offer and a brand new buyer in the majority of cases out there. There are only a few situations where the bank will reconsider the approved price and do so in a quick time frame. For the most part, you're going to lose a month to maybe even 2 or 3 months more time, simply because you didn't do those home inspections in the very beginning. And what if the buyer does home inspections and finds out that no matter what, I don't want this house anymore. It's got foundation issues, then again, you've lost all of that time, and your seller is now in a position that's exponentially more dangerous and more likely to find them in foreclosure than it was 4 months ago. So again, it's very important that they get these inspections done up front in advance as quickly as possible. You can then use those reports to get them a better price. This saves the buyer money too. Because if you do inspections after approval, you might be able to go back and get a few dollars off, but it's not going to be that much. It's not going to be nearly as much as you could have had the price reduced, or as you could have done had you reduced the price prior to the approval. And then never set a paperwork reduction. There's so much paperwork in a short sale. If anyone's ever been involved in one, you already know this. One of the things that we're constantly trying to do is reduce the amount of paperwork that's being shuffled around. Set closing dates flexibly on your contract so that they say something like 30 days from approval. For those of you that want to be really nice, say 40 days, but really they can do it quicker. And make sure that you hold them to that in some way if you can. But really, honestly, it's really more just so that you don't have to sign a closing date extension every 30 days. Some people will submit short sale offers to the bank. Today's 3/2, and they'll submit it with the closing date of say 4/15, right? Well, you're probably not going to close by 4/15 if you're submitting an offer to the bank today. That's almost certainly not going to be the case. But on 4/14, you're going to have to do a closing date extension, which is more paperwork and more signatures. It's harder for you as a real estate professional. But what's even more important is it's one more thing for your client. The seller gets more and more frustrated as the short sale process goes on. It starts off where they're gung-ho and they're willing to do all that paperwork up front. But then for many sellers, you get closer to the end, and one more form might be the straw that breaks the camel's back, and then they're gone. They're out of it. Because that's, again, we went back to the communication before. You got to set your seller's expectations. You've got to understand where their thought process lies today, and not assume that they're still just as on board today as they were before. Having them fill out paperwork they didn't need to fill out definitely can make the situation worse for sellers that are working 2 jobs and just don't have the time to, and are tired of the inconvenience and the frustration. And then if possible, again, with your contracts, try to find ways to make it impossible for the buyer to actually terminate after bank approval, with the exception of things like maybe seller default or the house burns down or things like that, but can't convey clean title for some reason. But outside of obvious issues like that, the buyer just shouldn't be able to say, oh, it's approved now, things just got real. Oh, you mean I have to actually purchase this house? No, I think I'm going to purchase this other one instead. Or I had the money 3 months ago, but I don't today, or whatever. No, that should be an immediate loss of earnest money. Not only have you worked all that time to get the approval, the seller, again, has invested all of that time. And it's just not fair to ask them to invest 4 months into this buyer's promises to buy the house, and then allow the buyer to break that promise and then have effectively only the same loss of time. The seller's loss of time is a lot more important than the buyer's loss of time in a short sale. And the buyer should have something else to have to pay for that as well. So contract considerations take us into valuation disputes. I these days know very little about this. I'm going to turn this over to Joey, who is probably I'm going to go on a limb and say the nation's best value disputer in short sales ever. Just because she's my partner and works with me, and we're like, yeah, I have to say that, right? Because she'll throw something at me. We're in the same room, right? All right, Joey, I think I need to do something to let you talk. I'm certainly not. I'm not even seeing my mouse right now, guys. So give me just a minute.
Can you hear me?
Ah, cool. Okay, I guess I already did that. I can hear you. All right, you're all set then. I'll be quiet.
Right, thanks, Jeff. So obviously the main goal is to not to have to do value disputes if you can help it. So there are a few things you can do to hopefully, mitigate the risk or reduce the need to do that. We suggest that you guys, like Jeff mentioned earlier, have the buyer do inspections within a reasonable amount of time. We suggest within 10 days of executing the contract or deciding on the offer. The buyer should be doing their inspections, one, so you can get that out to the appraiser when you hopefully meet them, but also so you can make sure that the buyer actually wants the property before you spend months on a short sale review. You don't want to get short sale approval and then, like Jeff mentioned, they terminate after approval. So one, you want to get the buyer to do inspections, get a copy of their report and or their repair bids. Hopefully they include some pictures of damage. Usually the appraiser is not going to like go under their crawl spaces or look up on the roof or anything like that. So if it doesn't jump out at them, they're not going to see it. Not only are they not going to see it, they might not know how much it costs. So that's why it's good to meet them out there with that repair bid. And of course, don't have your seller clean up or anything like that. It's not like the buyer's appraisal where obviously we want the property to come back as high as possible. For the short sale, it's better that it doesn't. So again, you don't have to hopefully worry about a value dispute. But in the event that you do still have to do a value dispute, that the bank's appraisal comes back too high, you can put together a full package. We suggest that you provide a little bit more than just comps, because you're expecting the bank's valuation department to know how to, make those adjustments and see exactly what you're seeing. So again, we suggest you put together a full complete package that includes, a CMA. You can do a CMA with your detailed adjustments. So it's not just picking out those comps that are sold within 6 months of the date of the appraisal and within a mile of the property. You're also, making those line item adjustments saying, hey, this comp has, 2 car garage where mine has 1. I'm going to take off $3,000 for that. Because again, you're trusting the bank. If you don't do that, you're trusting the bank to be an expert in your area and know exactly how much these things cost. And in our experience, you can't really trust the bank to do that. So you really want to lay everything out in front of them. Also, in the value dispute package, you want to include any repair bids and the inspection report. So again, you can kind of validate those adjustments you made. So if on your CMA you said, we have to take $10,000 off the value of the property because there's roof damage, you can heavily support that by having a $10,000 repair bid showing that roof damage, and also, like I said, color pictures of the damages. You also want to include your MLS history. Like Jeff mentioned earlier, it's good to start the price, where you think market value is, and then start working your way down versus trying to price it like a foreclosure. That way, if say the bank's appraisal comes back at 200,000 and you've already spent 30 days on the market at 200,000 and didn't get an offer, you can prove to the bank that the market is telling us that that's too high for the value. And then with your CMA, you want to also include the actual MLS sheets for those comps that you're using. Again, sometimes the agent view of those comps can have a little bit more detail in it than just a breakdown of your line item adjustments. So, you want to highlight any differences between the subject property or our house versus the comps that you're using. So, again, if your comp has a bigger garage or a higher square footage, or they just did some kitchen repairs, you want to literally highlight those things on the actual MLS page itself to give the bank fewer chances to miss those important things. Also, some banks actually require you to prepare a letter of explanation that just kind of ties in everything that you're trying to tell them, because again, you can't trust that hopefully they will see your adjustments and common sense will tell them, okay, this is how they got to this value. And then here's why they believe that the buyer's purchase price is supported. But sometimes they need a little bit more help. So you can put it into layman's terms for them by presenting a letter of explanation that just like very plainly says, hey, again, these are the reasons why I think you guys are wrong about this. You can also use that letter of explanation to call out any corrections that you may see are needed in the bank's appraisal. Just recently, we've had one where literally the appraiser said the house had a 2-car garage and it really only had one. Obviously, that affected the value, so we had to call that out. And again, if there are some errors in the appraisal, who's to say what else they missed? So I definitely bring that to the attention of the bank. We have buyer's appraisal up here. But the bank will tell you that they're not going to just simply substitute appraisals out. But if the buyer's already done their appraisal, I still like to include it because we can tell the bank, hey, no matter what, they're not going to be able to get lending for more than X amount. And then, sometimes if the buyer does a FHA appraisal, those can tend to run with the property for 6 months. So even after, we say the bank doesn't take this buyer's offer, we terminate, well, the next buyer is still going to use that FHA value that our previous buyer had. So we want to, call that attention to the bank and make sure that they're not going to, try to terminate this offer for, something that they weren't going to get in the future, because again, we have to use the current appraisal value. I think I mentioned it briefly, but when you're choosing comps to do your value dispute, it's very important. I've seen banks kick out value disputes just because the comps were too old, or they were too far from the property. So you want the comps to be sold within 6 months of the date the appraiser went to the property. And then you also want it to be within a mile radius of the property. If for whatever reason you have to go further back or further out in your search, definitely include the reasoning in the letter of explanation. You can tell very easily if the bank will allow you to do that in your dispute if you've realized the appraiser also went really far out in their comp search. And lastly, the bids and reports should be done by licensed individuals, whatever it is. So if it's a electric bid, you want to make sure it's done by a licensed electrician. Just to it'll give it a little bit more weight. Oftentimes the bank will require it, but even if they don't, that's something that you can point to and say, hey, this isn't, just the buyers. A lot of times investors, they'll have a good idea of how much stuff will cost, and they'll write that up in an Excel sheet and send it to you. Unfortunately, I don't think the bank will really, give that as much weight as a report or a repair bid from a licensed vendor. And real quick, before I wrap up the value dispute, I did want to mention that some investors require you to send the value dispute directly to them. And the bank may or may not know that. I've seen instances where servicers get confused on how to submit value disputes or reconsiderations of value to the VA, for instance. And to the point where they believe the VA just isn't even, reviewing value disputes. So definitely you want to send your value dispute directly to the VA and also to Fannie Mae instead of just only going through the servicer to kind of save you some time. Moving to closing coordinating. Now these are handled, for the most part, like you guys would close one of your typical retail transactions, but obviously they have a couple more, guidelines, and you have some stricter deadlines. So I'm only going to touch on the main, kind of potential issues that you want to hopefully mitigate here. So you want to keep your payoffs and all your approval documents current. So usually payoffs and approval letters will only be good for about 30 to 45 days. Generally, that's enough time for the buyer to get their financing. However, if something comes up and, in your follow-ups, you learn that you're going to need a little bit more time, it's best to request those payoffs and extensions for approvals at least a week before they expire. I have seen instances where, if you were to request the extension a day after the approval expired, since you're technically outside of that window, they needed to do a whole new review. So to kind of hopefully reduce the risk of that happening, we do suggest you guys ask for those up to 5 to 7 business days before they expire. That way, if the bank does need anything additional, maybe bank statements and pay stubs, to review for a new one, you have enough time to get those to them. Another common issue, I kind of mentioned that a little bit earlier, is if the buyer's appraisal comes back too low. So say for instance, the contract is at 200 and the bank approved 200, but the buyer's appraisal comes back at 190. It's not generally looked at the same as sending in, an inspection report and asking for 5,000 off for HVAC repairs or something like that. Again, buyers' appraisals are, they determine how much they can get financing for. So I wouldn't just terminate a contract just because the buyer's appraisal came back too low. I've seen, that I guess that could have been a misconception as well. Buyer's agents just sending in a termination because their client's appraisal came back too low. You do have the opportunity to send those directly into your single point of contact at the bank and explaining the situation with a signed price amendment. Just saying, again, you understand that they first accepted this one offer, but unfortunately this buyer can't get lending for more than X amount. And I've seen them come down. Again, I do suggest going straight to the investor if you can for this, because it's just something different, and a lot of single points of contacts may not know that there is an option to have the purchase price reduced after approval. One of the biggest issues that we've seen in closing in short sales is when things just pop up on title, whether they're unreleased mortgages. They could be unreleased from a previous owner or just unreleased from your client. They could have judgments, IRS liens, those types of things, city sewer liens, and all of that I've seen as well. So in the event you didn't have title pulled before you got the offer, and now you do after closing, there are, again, still some things you can do to kind of save the deal. If it is an unpaid sewer lien or municipal, city, anything dealing with the city, I've seen a lot of times the bank will go ahead and cover that if they consider it a tax. So for instance, that we would put sewer tax on the HUD, ask for however much that is, and then send them a copy of the actual judgment. And oftentimes they'll go ahead and approve that. I will say, actually, just last week, we had an instance where Bank of America said, very quickly, no, we're not paying for anything. And we took it to Fannie Mae, and within, 2 days of bringing the city tax lien to Fannie Mae's attention, we had a new approval letter. So that's definitely the benefit of going directly to the investor when that option is available. I'm not exactly sure why B of A said they wouldn't be able to. But we knew that it was something that they should do, which is why, again, we reached directly out to Fannie Mae. In the event that it's in an unreleased mortgage, from whether it's your seller or previous owner of the property, we suggest you get the title policy from origination, as well as the executed HUD that they used, because a lot of times all that's required is just proof that that lien has been paid. Oftentimes you'll see that when it's an unreleased mortgage, it's an old bank that's no longer in business. So the title company will just insure over that defect if you can prove that it was at least paid. So that's one of the first things that we do, just to go ahead and just send it to the title company and see if that, takes care of that defect. If not, we suggest you then take the title policy that you just received for your current closing, along with the origination documents, and you reach out to the company that has to release their lien, or that has to release their mortgage. A lot of times, again, if you can prove to them that it's already been paid, but yet it's still showing up on title, they'll go ahead and take care of it. You do want to get title ordered as soon as possible in closing, because this is typically a lengthy process. If you did your research and you've sent the information to the right department at the right bank the first time, it can still take weeks for them to get back to you and acknowledge your request and then send out the satisfaction that's required. But I have seen it take months to track down unreleased mortgages, just because, like I said, the bank might be closed. One resource you guys can use is MERS. So it's MERS, and you can look up the ID number of the loan on MERS, and that'll tell you the current servicer and investor of that mortgage that you're trying to track down. And then from there, you can reach out to those entities with the title policy from origination and the current one. And you're going to also likely need a third-party authorization just to speak on anything that's not in your name, obviously. And if it's not in your client's name, typically you won't need an authorization, because again, your client wouldn't be able to authorize you to speak on someone else's loan. So usually you don't need an authorization from the previous owner if they still have a lien on title. And I believe I've covered everything. Yes, that's MERS, MERS. And they have a servicer ID for a lot of deeds of trust. You can usually find it on the top right section, and I think it's like 16 digits or something like that. You can go to MERS and type in those 16 digits, and you may need either the property address and or your client's last four of their social, but you'll be able to look up all that information to track it down. And I believe that was it.
All right. All right, guys. So we mentioned in the beginning that we'd be able to take some questions at the end. Haven't seen very many of them come across so far. So hopefully that means that Joey's been as thorough as possible. Hopefully not to the point of putting everyone to sleep, but I mean, of course, it's short sale, so it can only be so interesting. I think the value of the information is more than just the entertainment, but hopefully we did our best not to make it too boring. I did get one question about VA Tidewater initiatives, and that's something that you can use to dispute the appraisal values in a transaction. Basically, the Tidewater side of things, what happens in a VA purchase mortgage is that the appraiser will go out and do the appraisal and then notify the bank. It's like 2 or 3 days. And again, we don't work on the buyer side of things, so we don't always see every single detail that happens over there. But essentially, when you do an appraisal for a VA loan for a buyer, the bank finds out a couple of days in advance of what that value comes in at. And if that value is lower than the actual purchase price that was agreed upon between the buyer and the seller, then there's a process to actually dispute it at that point. That is probably the better way to go, at least first, because there is a process to dispute it. Now, there's a process for reconsideration of value with VAs, and it's similar. All those processes are similar. To the process that Joey just described, right? But it is going to be more complicated in a short sale to dispute the lender's approved purchase price, VA or anybody else, than it is than it would be with that side of the situation, with the buyer side of things, because there's actually a process to dispute on the buyer side. To my knowledge, that doesn't exist anywhere else. I'm not 100% certain of that, but because it does there, I would highly recommend that you approach the buyer's side of things first to try to get the appraisal adjusted to the purchase price before going to the short sale side and trying to get the actual short sale agreement down lower. You can maybe do both at the same time. I mean, because at the end of the day, the actual purchase price of the home means a lot less to the seller than getting the closing done. So you can go on the buyer side of things and the seller side of things simultaneously, and whoever bites first, basically go with that direction. But it's just, again, the short sales are about each individual situation, and things do vary depending on the individual transaction. Okay, so Jasmine asked if in the bank short sale package, the owner has asking if the owner would have to request the bank's actual short sale package. One of the things, I'm not sure if we mentioned this in the beginning, but we'll be sending out to everybody that attended the meeting today some information, some useful stuff like loss mitigation department phone numbers, general checklist that you can use with your clients. You can scrub our logo out if you want to, and a number of other different, like just helpful documents that make the process a little bit easier. A really detailed outline about marketing and BPO valuations and things that can help get your properties approved more often. And part of it will be some information about the short sale package. Most banks don't require, and most short sales in general, and I say banks, when I say banks, I mean servicers, and of course there's servicer guidelines and investor guidelines, and it depends on the combination of the two as to what the short sale package is. Wells Fargo doesn't just have one short sale package, they have at least two, maybe three. And that's the same is true for many of the larger servicers out there as well. But the best way to get a package from a bank is really for you just to call the bank. You do not need to have your client call them directly. And in our experience, every single time that the client calls the bank, your chances of success go down by a certain point or two, or a percentage point or two. It might be a fraction of a percent. It might be multiple, percentage points, but clients calling the bank is a bad idea. Of course, you're not allowed to tell the client that they can't call their bank. What we usually tell people is that, it's best to avoid conversations with your bank. And if you must speak to them, make sure that you're only asking questions and that you're never giving any information. You don't want your clients to actually talk to the bank and tell them anything, because what you say can and will be used against you. And in many instances, we've seen in the past when the clients call the bank actually cuts the short sale off and terminates it and puts them into loan modification. And the client was never going to be qualified for a loan modification. So it's kind of dangerous. So never have them call. Just, I would say, do it yourself. And of course, you have to start with a third-party authorization form, but most banks have those available at the website, and those don't change very often from investor to investor. So if I receive a short sale lead today, who else will I have to reach out to besides the owner? How to start one up? That's a good question. We did kind of skip over that due to the 501 nature, but hey, we don't have a lot of questions. I'd be happy to give you a little bit of basis on that. Essentially, if you receive a lead today, I wouldn't reach out to anybody. You really want to make sure that that homeowner is dedicated toward moving forward with the transaction first, and not everybody is on the first day that you speak to them. So the first thing that you're going to do with that person is to ask them for financial support, financial documents which support the hardship that they're facing. Most banks do have financial worksheets available online. Form 710 is the most commonly used financial worksheet across the entire industry. It is relatively safe to have your clients just automatically fill out Form 710. And this is just a general, Joey, I'm not sure if like it's one of the major guys, Fannie or Freddie or somebody created that a while back, and pretty much everyone else uses it, even when it's not a Fannie or Freddie loan. And what it is just an outline of all their expenses, all of their income, what their hardship is, just stuff like that. I think it's like 4 or 5 pages. What I would ask clients to do in the very beginning is to fill that form out, and then to provide the basic financial documents that are required for most short sales, which is 2 months bank statements, 2 months of income statements, and then 2 years of tax returns. They'll need to write a hardship letter, which can be done a couple of different ways. You can help them with that. They'll just have to sign it if you do, or they can do it all on their own. But there's a very important key element of requiring these documents, which you would need in addition to, of course, a listing agreement. You can't even call the bank on their behalf until you have a listing agreement. But in general, the listing agreement, that's easy enough. People will sign that a lot more easily than they will take the time to fill out a financial worksheet and procure all these financial documents. But you're going to need their help through this transaction to actually get to closing. They're going to need to remain committed to it all the way through that process. And the only way to judge that and not waste your time now is to get them to do some work in advance, basically, because we're not charging them anything up front. I mean, some agents do, but most agents don't. And I applaud you if you're one of the ones that don't. I don't believe that distressed sellers should have to, come out of pocket up front with anything other than their time and their commitment to the transaction, which is why we ask for those documents. Once you get those documents to start a short sale, in many, many cases, you do have to have an offer. So you would need to call the bank at that point and then ask them, what the process is specific to this particular loan type. And again, that requires that you send in your third-party authorization form that you've already had signed. And then they'll give you an idea of what you can do. With certain kinds of loans, you can go ahead and send in all those documents that you've procured, and they'll start the short sale. They'll even go out and do an appraisal of the property and give you list price guidance in terms of what they think the value of the home is worth up front. But in most situations, they won't do any of that until you have an offer. And which is why it's so important that you follow the best case practices for pricing strategies, because you don't want that first offer that you submit to be $50,000 too low, and you'll just have to start the whole process over. Most short sales do require more than one offer to be submitted in order to actually be approved and closed. But if you're lucky, or if you're a little bit lucky and you follow all the best case practices, then it won't be more than one offer with every transaction. It'll be like every other transaction. You'll have to do two, and the other half will do one. And then from there, it's just ask the bank questions. And I'll go back to the myths and misconceptions slide and just remind you that when you speak to a person, get a feel for whether or not you trust what they're saying is true. And if you have any doubt whatsoever, call and ask somebody else the very same question, and oftentimes you'll get a different answer. And if you do, call and ask a third person and go with the answer that you got twice. It is worth your time to make those phone calls. I mean, unless you're dealing with like US Bank that takes an hour, when you're on hold with them or whatever. But for the most part, you are able to, that's a good question. You are able to get through in a lot quicker time frame, and it is worth the extra calls to get that information. The best marketing strategy to work with a short sale listing, Rashid, if you'd like to maybe give us a call, Rachel, who works in that department at our firm, would be happy to go over some details as it applies to your market and your specific situation. I think what I went into before with marketing was as much as I can say on a nationwide basis without really knowing, certain elements about your local market and what you're dealing with right now. But you can rewatch that, because we'll send out the copy of the video, and that, if that's still, want some more information, we'd be happy to help you out. We work with agents all the time in that regard. It's not at any sort of like professional level. We don't charge a fee for it. It's just that, there's a lot of agents out there that want to get into the short sale business. And we'd like to think that once you do, you'll choose us to help you with the processing of those files. So if there's anything we can do to help you be successful at it, then we're willing to do that for free. That's no big deal. Shannon asked a question about commission. We didn't get into this, and this is a really good question. Up until 2013, I believe, commission was the Wild West with short sales. About half of the short sale listings out there would require commission reductions, and the other half didn't have any rules at all. You could charge 7, 8, 9%, anything that wasn't completely out of the world. And as long as the bank met their minimum net, then you could do whatever you want. In 2013, Fannie Mae basically said, we're going to stop cutting commissions, and we're going to stop allowing anything over 6%. And everybody followed suit. These days, I still hear, random stories from agents. Good question, Kat. I still hear random stories from agents that suggest that they've been able to get commissions of 7% with certain banks. And I would just remind you guys that, I've said this a couple of times and not as certain terms, but no two Wells Fargo short sales do not work exactly alike. And a Wells Fargo and a Bank of America short sale are certainly not going to work the same way. And the reason is because of the rule set that's being followed. These banks are just servicers, and they're servicers following different rules for different mortgages. So the rules do vary greatly depending on the individual transaction, who the servicer is, what their rules are, whether or not they have delegated authority to make new rules or they don't. And then, of course, what the rules are of the investor that holds the note. So we always recommend that everybody just goes with 6% flat. And the reason for that is that your chances of getting anything more are virtually null. And if you go with 7% just to try it out, then what's going to happen is that's going to almost certainly, with basic certainty, it's going to get kicked back by the bank. And they're going to say, nope, I need a listing agreement that is at 6%. And every time that the bank has to kick a document back, people think, okay, well, I can get that document, get it signed, and send it to the bank, and I've only lost 4 business hours. But it's never 4 business hours. You were at the top of their pile, and if your short sale package had been perfect, you could have gotten an approval that day, or you could have gotten to the next stage of approval that day. But because you had something wrong, and it's not to say that this doesn't happen sometimes to everyone, it does, but because there was an issue, they kicked it back and said, this is a problem. So maybe you got the commission fixed on your listing agreement within 4 hours, but you probably lost 2 to 3 days, if not even longer, with one of the slower banks out there, because for some of them, they only look at your file once a week or once every 10 days. So the next 10 days goes by, they'll look at it again, they'll see that your commission's been fixed. Okay, cool. But then they'll notice something else, so we just always recommend that if you know it's a rule, it's a policy, 6% is the rule, go with 6%, leave it at that. And as a footnote to this, everything is considered commission, right? So I know that in some markets, agents receive listing fees, or their brokerages demand listing fees from the clients on top of the standardized commission. The bank will reject that every single time. What they do is, if it's a $100,000 listing and a $6,000 commission, that is 6%. Obviously, if you charge a listing fee on top of that of $295, then your commission is $62.95, and that is more than 6% of a $100,000 sale. So the bank won't allow it. So even if that's in your listing agreement, about half the time they'll kick your agreement back for it, but the other half of the time they'll just wait till closing and then kick it back then, and they want to prove the HUD at closing. So just make sure that there's no other additional fees in there that would make your commission be even higher. Kat asked that, will banks pay the agent if the agent is the buyer? Joey, I'm going to let you answer that question, because I know that there's a yes and a no to that. So I'm going to let you provide the details on that one.
Okay. Most recently, I can confidently say usually not, no.
Oh, so there's not a yes.
Well, you'll get all the way to approval. They may approve it and then at closing realize, wait, the person signing is the same person as the buyer's agent. And typically the buyers cannot get any funds at closing. So generally, no. If we see an offer that comes through when we notice that the buyer is the agent, we suggest either they refer that to another agent in their office and work that out however they want to work that out, or they reduce the purchase price by the amount of the commission and just write in the contract somewhere that they are waiving the commission. When the buyer's agent waives their commission, it doesn't necessarily mean that now the listing agent can only get 3% commission. The bank may still approve the full 6% to go to the listing agent because they just approved 6% commission. So that does open up an opportunity for the listing agent to get 6. But again, generally, no, they don't allow the agent to get the commission if they are also the buyer.
And if you guys are ever facing a situation like that where you're at closing and something comes up and it's just a question about your transaction in specifically, then you can feel free to give us a call. I mentioned Rachel earlier. She's typically the person. She's our client service specialist. She's not on the Zoom today, but she's running the office, but with us here. But she has the answers to a lot of these questions, and she can help you with sort of formulating your response, usually within 4 or 5 minutes. What we do isn't rocket science necessarily. We just know the answers to things, a lot of answers, and no matter what the no matter what the situation may be for you in your transaction, there's usually an answer to address the problem. Sometimes the answer is just no. And when you're the buyer and the buyer's agent, I think I thought like it used to be, I think, a little bit, they would approve the commission to the buyer a little bit more often in the past. I'm not as involved in that side of things anymore because Joy runs that department. But it sounds to me like that's trending toward not approving them anymore at all. And so what we would recommend is, what Joey said, is just to avoid that situation. Find an agent who you work with closely at your office and have them act as buyer's agent of record. You can sometimes transition that over after you've submitted the offer to the bank, but it's usually best to do that in the very beginning because there's certain checks and things that they have to do based on all the parties in the transaction, including the professionals that are assigned to the parties. And it's best not to wait till the end to get that done. Jasmine asked about the seller getting a 1099, and have we ever gotten that waived? To my knowledge, the issuance of a 1099 is not optional for a bank. So getting it waived in a situation where there is actually a deficiency being forgiven is not legally possible, because what's happening is that the bank if you owe the bank an extra $50,000, that if your seller owes the bank an extra $50,000, then the bank doesn't make them pay that. They are, by the government standards, effectively giving your seller $50,000 for free. It's the bank may have in the past waived that, but I don't think that's ever been something they were allowed to waive. Like, they can make the choice not to, but that doesn't mean that if the IRS found out, they would be happy about that. They probably wouldn't. And really, before 2010, short sales were crazy. Most of the ones that I did in the 90s, we had to call the bank and explain to them. The page that first ranked on Google for our firm was actually not a page called short sales. It was called pre-foreclosures, because back then there was a different term for it, for everyone. We called them pre-foreclosures. Other people called them short sales. Other people called them something else. And then just the whole industry sort of wrapped their head around short sale. But the idea, the point of all that is that as we all sort of figured out the way this works and the best way to do things, banks were figuring that out too. And they were allowing certain things that they don't allow now. They were doing certain things they probably weren't supposed to be doing. Banks make mistakes like that all the time. Wells Fargo gets fined almost monthly for things like that. So that's exaggeration, obviously, but we've all heard of it. So banks make these mistakes. The 1099, though, in and of itself does not equal tax liability for your client. Yeah, definitely watch that video at our site if that's coming up for you. I forget his name. I should remember,